Hello and welcome to this celebration of faith. I'm Demetria Kaladimos and I'll be your host for this one-hour special, Hope for a New Century. In this next hour, we're going to be looking at the landmark agreement made this summer between the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and three Reformed denominations: the Presbyterian Church in the USA, the Reformed Church in America, and the United Church of Christ. This marks the beginning of a new era in ecumenical relations and what promises to be more cooperative ministries in the future. The votes in denominational meetings this summer to agree to work together more closely reflect the kind of collaboration that's been going on in an informal way in many local communities across the country. Joining me is H. George Anderson, presiding bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. We welcome you, Bishop Anderson.
Dimitri, it's really good to be here.
Now, we are talking tonight about hope for a new century. That's what we're calling this program. What kind of hope does this summer's actions bring to members of the denominations who actually voted to be in agreement with one another?
I think it tells them that the prayer of Jesus about the church being one so that the world can believe is indeed coming into effect and beginning to come to pass. And that's a great sign of hope for all of us.
We're practicing what we preached.
Exactly.
Okay, we'll be taking calls from viewers a little bit later in our program. Anyone in our viewing audience can call in toll free. Here's the number, 1-800-264-0444. Again, that's 1-800-264-0444. But first, let's take a look at what happened at the ELCA Churchwide Assembly in Philadelphia this past August.
Philadelphia was the site this August for a gathering of 1,044 voting members attending the ELCA's 5th Churchwide Assembly, Making Christ Known, Alive in Our Heritage and Hope. At the assembly, voting members overwhelmingly approved proposed ELCA initiatives for a new century. They are that we deepen our worship life, teach the faith, witness to God's action in the world, strengthen one another in mission, help the children, connect with youth and young adults, and develop leaders for the next century. Voting members also elected the ELCA's third vice president, Dr. Addie J. Butler of Philadelphia.
I believe we're going to grow as the ELCA. We're going to grow numerically. We're going to grow in terms of our fulfilling our goal, not our numerical goal only, but our intentions behind the goal of being an inclusive church.
In other action, a new statement, the use of the means of grace, provides for the communion of the baptized. In the past, church doctrine precluded the communing of infants. Perhaps the most heated debate in Philadelphia centered around ecumenical issues. The Assembly approved a proposal declaring full communion with the three churches of the Reformed tradition, the Presbyterian Church USA, the Reformed Church in America, and the United Church of Christ. Bishop Guy Edmiston of the Lower Susquehanna Synod was the Lutheran co-chair of the Lutheran Reformed Coordinating Committee.
So I think it really is a great time ecumenically, and I think this sets the tone for our continued development of ecumenical convergence toward full communion with other church bodies in our country.
After approving the proposal for full communion with the three Reformed churches, voting members narrowly rejected a similar proposal with the Episcopal Church.
By a vote of 684 to 351, the proposal does not receive the necessary two-thirds majority, and the proposal is defeated.
Following considerable debate, voting members agreed to bring to the 1999 Churchwide Assembly a revised proposal for full communion with the Episcopal Church.
I feel very positive, and I think that something extremely positive in the way of a new agreement for full communion can be worked out between us by 1999.
The Assembly voted the second day to use the term full communion and set even a time frame within which we hope to accomplish that. That is, by action potentially in 1999 by the LCA, and 1 year later at the turn of the millennium by the General Convention of the Episcopal Church USA. That's an extremely exciting prospect.
In a third ecumenical action, voting members adopted a joint declaration on the doctrine of justification, declaring 16th century condemnations no longer apply to present Roman Catholic teaching.
On the ground and the local level, it will enable local Lutheran and Catholic groups that are already working together to be reinforced in their work. It will encourage Bible study, common preaching on this doctrine of justification by grace through faith, which is at the very center of our Christian faith together. It will enable us to look again at our history books and rewrite how we tell the story of the 16th century and our alienation, Lutheran and Catholic, and how we talk about the reconciliation to which we are called.
Outside the plenary hall, voting members at the churchwide assembly experience their church at work in the world through the Heritage and Hope Village.
Just the excitement of being here for a churchwide assembly is a real great experience for me.
The next assembly of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America will meet in Denver, Colorado in 1999.
Bishop Anderson, just to review some of the chronology of this, the three other denominations actually voted in favor of the formula of agreement prior to your churchwide assembly in Philadelphia. And I understand that all three officers of the PCUSA, the RCA, and the UCC were in Warsaw together when word of the ELCA vote in favor of the agreement came through. Now, these three gentlemen announced the results of the Lutherans' vote to the floor of the World Association of Reformed Churches. Let's take a look at a clip of that.
Some 32 years ago, our three communions, along with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, entered into negotiations looking toward the declaration of full communion after centuries of separation. Over the past several months, the Reformed Church in America, the Presbyterian Church in the USA, and the United Church of Christ voted affirmatively to indeed declare full communion with our four partners. I am very excited and pleased to announce that yesterday, in the city of Philadelphia, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America also affirmed the declaration of full communion among our four bodies. This is indeed for us an historic moment, and we thank God for God's graciousness, and we thank God for the faithfulness of God's people. Thanks be to God.
And thank goodness for videotape. That was quite a moment in history.
Oh, it was so exciting. And it is, in fact, the new beginning for us as four church bodies, bridging gaps that have existed for 400 years. So we're going into a new century with new partners, and that's great.
It sure is. I'd like to invite our audience to call into our studio with any questions they might have. The toll-free number we have set up is 1-800-264-0444. Let me repeat that, 1-800-264-0444. And we will be taking your calls in just a moment. Now, there were other proposals that the ELCA voted on this summer that sort of set the stage for bringing together these different denominations. I know at your churchwide assembly, you voted to approve a joint declaration that actually abolished the 16th century mutual condemnation between the Lutheran Church and the Roman Catholic Church over what was called the doctrine of justification. Tell us what that was all about.
Well, the doctrine of justification is a kind of code word for a very simple concept, which is, how does God relate to us when we as human beings so often stray from what God's will would be? The doctrine of justification is the question about how God bridges that gap. And so for many years, Lutherans and Catholics have thought themselves to be on opposite sides. The Catholics saying, well, you have to do certain things in order to make God love you. And Lutherans saying it's just what you believe, and that's all that counts. And in the last 20 years, we've worked together to understand that each of us says more than what the other side had been hearing. And so we were able to find a way to say all of what we both believed in a common declaration.
There was also talk about sacraments, of course. The ELCA passed a resolution about the practice of sacraments like baptism and communion. Now, there have been strong differences of opinion, really, in the past over these sort of practices, whether baptism is appropriate in infancy or later as a conscious choice for a person. And communion, I know, has been seen as different because of what the believers understand that grape juice or wine to stand for. How did you iron out those differences?
Our own church has had a fairly steady picture of what these two sacraments, baptism and the Lord's Supper, were all about. We have believed that it's quite appropriate to baptize infants because, in fact, God loves us first, and it's a good symbol of that to have the baptismal water come to the child before the child can even say God's name. As far as the sacrament of the altar is concerned, Lutherans have affirmed, and the new statement continues to affirm that Christ, according to Christ's own promise, does come to us in the sacrament and is present under the forms of bread and wine, so that we receive not only the good words, but also the very presence of Christ himself.
And we're welcoming our first caller. Dorothy from Texas, go ahead with your question.
I wonder if the fulfillment of the answer to Jesus' prayer in John 17, that we all may be one, is not fulfilled in the amalgamation and the coming together of the brethren.
Dorothy, that's a wonderful name. Gift of God.
That's right.
I would say that indeed bringing together these churches, not merging them, but bringing them closer together in fellowship and mutual recognition is exactly that bringing together of brothers and sisters in Christ that I'm sure our Lord wanted.
Thank you.
Bishop, you mentioned not a merger, and I know you prefer not to think of it in those terms. Many of us hear about businesses merging, and they actually adopt each other's rules of all sorts, but this allows for diversity still.
I think that's very important. We still maintain our own religious traditions, our own structures, our own doctrines, but we now say that there is more that unites us than divides us. And it was because of that recognition that we were able to take these steps. And although we have not merged, we have recognized now that there's a lot we can do together, and that's really important.
Now, the news clips that we saw earlier, Bishop, talked about what is called the formula of agreement between the ELCA and those three Reformed denominations. First of all, I think we should define those terms. What does it mean to be a Reformed denomination? And what really is the difference between Reformed denominations and the Lutheran tradition?
Well, we're going to have to do a little church history here,
Okay.
I think, to get that straight. At the time of the Reformation, which was in the early 1500s, Luther believed that it was important to make sure that people in the church understood that God loved them first. And he felt that because of things he heard and saw in the church of his time, that message wasn't coming through clearly. And so he began to teach, and as we all know, great controversy developed. And out of that controversy came a division. Luther was excommunicated. His followers, named then Lutherans, began to follow his teachings. They were spread throughout Europe by the printing press, which was a pretty new invention in those years. And other countries also began to understand themselves as believing what Luther taught. But they did it in their own way. In Switzerland, for example, John Calvin, very bright person, a very clear thinker, developed his own understanding of the Reformation doctrines and was able to convince the town council in Geneva that they should follow these principles. And so the town became essentially a town of the Reformation. People from all over Europe came to Geneva in order to escape persecution in their own countries, and out of that beginning came Reformed churches in Scotland, in the Netherlands, and in England. Well, those groups took the name of John Calvin and eventually were called Reformed churches. So you have the Presbyterian Church in Scotland, you have the Congregationalists in England, and the Reformed Church in Holland. Lutherans basically remained in Scandinavia and in Germany. So although they were all children of Luther, they took different names and had different histories from that time forward.
Now, we're getting our terms straight tonight. Perhaps you can give me an example of what it means to be in full communion.
Okay, full communion is an interesting term because it's fairly new. Full communion means that we recognize that in the other church, the gospel is preached correctly, that the sacraments are administered according to Christ's command, and that it's possible for clergy from one denomination to serve in the sister denomination as long as they're subject to the rules of the receiving group. It also lets us have a chance to plan together. And finally, I have to recognize that a lot of this has already been going on in local communities, and we're now just formalizing and approving that kind of ecumenism.
Really? Give us an example of how that's working.
Well, for example, a good example would be the collaboration of ministry going on in, let's look at White Sulphur Springs, Montana, for example. The American Lutheran Church and the Community Presbyterian Church there have joined their congregations together in that town, and they've found that their ministry is stronger because of that cooperation.
Well, let's take a look.
The little town of White Sulphur Springs was really formed as a guard post, if you will, in which minerals, gold, copper, silver, and so forth, was taken from the Little Belt Mountains, the Big Belt Mountains, the castles, really to the steamships on the Missouri River at below Great Falls. And ranching became a large part of what went on here. Present time, ranching is still a large part of the economy locally. Timbering goes up and down depending on timber prices.
I was chairman of the committee that called Dean Sandberg. I guess I would just tell the whole world that he was an answer to a lot of prayers, and he seems to really like it. And I don't think a Sunday goes by that I just don't thank God he came, because he and Audrey are delightful.
Ministering in a rural area, this is rural area in the midst of all kinds of scenery. So it's rural, but it's in the midst of mountains, which makes it a little unique in itself.
The area here is so picturesque, glorious really, with the mountains.
No one here is anonymous, so we all know each other, which has its pluses and minuses. One of the challenges that we have here is that it is a combination of two denominations, Presbyterian and Lutheran. The formula of agreement was just passed recently by the Evangelical Lutheran Church.
Was crucified, dead, and buried.
The fact of the matter is, a lot of the parts of that formula were already being done here in White Sulphur Springs, in the cooperative effort between the Presbyterians and the Lutherans. One of my tasks is to protect the integrity of each denomination. Even though I'm a Lutheran, I also have to respect the traditions and practices of the Presbyterian Church. When I'm conducting a worship service in the Lutheran Church, I wear the alb.
About a kind of clothing or the kind of uniform that Christians need to wear.
Now in the Presbyterian Church, they're a little more flexible, so that I will sometimes wear a suit with a clerical collar, sometimes with just a tie. There are some accommodations that, in order to worship together as one worshiping community, some accommodations that they had to reach. One of which is the Lord's Prayer, because the Lord's Prayer in the Presbyterian Church is different from the Lutheran tradition. They decided to meet each other halfway and use the word sins.
Resurrection of the body and the life everlasting. Amen.
I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story.
We've been going down to Ringling since we've got here, but I think that it began about 3 years ago. Ringling is 22 miles south of White Sulphur Springs. We take the trip down there twice a month, first and third Sundays usually of every month, to have a kind of an informal worship service.
You know,
we appreciate Dean coming out and doing that.
Oh,
you know,
tremendous.
Doing the
like I said, he plays guitar, so we never had a pulpit. Being into wood and being a carpenter myself, I built him a nice stand and the little pedestals we put his foot up so he can play the guitar and wouldn't have to leave his pulpit.
Heading into the new millennium, this will be, I think, a profound witness for the world, that we can work together. Mission is changing rapidly. The way we do ministry and the way the gospel is communicated in our culture is in radical shift. We need to work together. This will enhance that mission that's there for all of us.
I think we're really in an exciting time in the life of the church. And this time of excitement and transition, I think, brings new hope for a new church in America. And where that's going to go, I don't know, but I'm glad I'm going to be there.
Well, so there you have two executives of two different denominations who will be working together to serve the state of Montana in really a collaborative way.
Yes, the Montana Synod and the two presbyteries in Montana already have 7 congregations that are working in cooperative ministry. And now they can continue in a much more intentional way.
Well, if you in the audience are interested in purchasing a copy of this program, you can call this number, 1-800-328-4648. The cost of a VHS tape is $19.95. You must ask for tape number 69-4909. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the formula of agreement and what it means on a practical level. That's when we come back. We'll return in just a minute to take questions from our viewers. Stay with us. Welcome back to Hope for a New Century. For those of you who may just be joining us, this program is taking a look at the historic formula of agreement which the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Presbyterian Church in the USA, the Reformed Church in America, and the United Church of Christ have all approved this summer. With me is presiding bishop of the ELCA, Bishop H.G. Anderson, to explain what this agreement means and to take some questions from our viewing audience. Now, if you have a question, you can call toll-free 1-800-264-0444. And we do have a caller on the line, Deborah from Ohio. Go ahead. Oh, I think we might have missed Deborah, Bishop, but tell me a little bit more about the formula of agreement. What does this mean for these denominations and the way in which they'll work?
Well, Demetria, it's going to be very exciting. Let's just take one simple example. We all have, in our various denominations, new Christians moving into the United States from all over the world. Arabs, we have Hispanic people, we have people from Asia. Each of us is trying to provide worship materials for these folks. Now, it's going to be much better for us now to be able to work together and to say, well, you've done a lot of work with, say, Korean ministry in the Presbyterian Church, so maybe you can help us understand better how to work in this area, and perhaps you've got some worship materials that other traditions can use as well. So in that way, I think we'll be able to do better mission work here in our own country simply because we can work together.
And on a basic level, it sounds like save some time and perhaps expense duplicating efforts.
You just think of 4 different churches putting out all these materials, and if we could agree to put some out together, it would be a great benefit, and we could use those funds then to do other good missionary work.
Okay. We do have a caller on the line right now. Claire is calling from Florida. Go ahead with your question.
Bishop Anderson, my question is, what was, quote, the stumbling block in the full communion with the Episcopalians?
Well, that's a very important question. It turned out that at our assembly, actually a majority of the delegates were ready to move ahead with full communion with the Episcopal Church. But we had agreed beforehand that it would take a 2/3 majority to do that. And in fact, we fell 6 votes short out of over 1,000 votes of achieving that 2/3 majority. I think the basic stumbling block is that the Episcopal Church is structured somewhat differently from us. We have bishops, and they also have bishops. But the fact is that the way they see the role of their bishops is somewhat different from the ones that we have had in our own Lutheran tradition. So we Lutherans are still trying to work out how fully we can come into agreement with the tradition that the Episcopal Church has had. For example, would bishops serve for life, or would they, as in our Lutheran tradition, be elected for a term and then after their term is over go back as being regular pastors in the church? Issues like that, practical issues about structure, were the problem, I think.
And even though the votes weren't there, you are going to revisit this at some point in time, correct?
Yes, the delegates, after deciding that they couldn't move ahead, did go on to say, we would like very much to work with the Episcopal Church in finding a new way to move forward. So we are going to revisit this whole question in our next assembly in 1999. The Episcopalians meet next in the year 2000. So that I'm hoping that we will be able to go to the Episcopal Church in 1999 and say, here's where we've come. This is how far we are. Now can you accept this? Can we work together and find the agreement we're both looking for?
We're welcoming Derek on the line from Virginia. Go ahead.
Yes, I was just calling. I'm a minister here in Virginia, and I was just glad to see that the believers are coming together. And because the enemy, we are to come in, which is the devil. And the Bible said that the thief come only but to kill, steal, and destroy. And I praise God that Bishop have got this thing together and that God has given him a vision for it.
Well, thank you, Derek. I would say that we've all been surprised at how God has worked in our communions during these last years to bring us together. We discussed these matters for decades, and we always thought it'd be nice to do something, but there were always some issues in the way. And it just seems miraculous that in these last months we've been able to come together, and we just thank God that this gift of unity has been given us in this way.
A quick reminder of our telephone number if you'd like to ask Bishop Anderson a question. It's 1-800-264-0444. And I'm wondering, Bishop, does this put any sort of a pressure on clergy? Are they going to have to learn all new things?
I think that pastors who will be working in joint services will indeed have to find out how the other half lives, so to speak. But in a real sense, our worship services follow the same structure. The wording is often different, but the way we proceed in worship, the parts of the worship service are so similar that I think those pastors who are working in settings with other traditions will find it's not only easy to do, but will perhaps enrich their ministry by giving them some new worship materials to work with.
Now, Bishop, you've shown us a rural setting where collaboration makes a lot of sense when denominational populations are shrinking. Where else does this kind of joint ministry make sense?
We have a ministry going on in Minneapolis with a Native American community which promises new hope for a population that was experiencing pain and difficulty in an urban setting.
Sounds interesting. Let's take a look at that.
We burn the sage. It's a reminder of the loved ones that have gone. This is a reminder that we burn the sage for them and honoring them. And this is this blanket here is remembering of the 13-year-old that was shot in our streets right out here by the church. This is his blanket, and we saged this here.
I am a Lutheran pastor on a specialized call from the Minneapolis Area Synod here to serve All Nations Indian Church, a UCC congregation. We're in a neighborhood right now that even though it is economically the poorest, it probably also is a neighborhood that shows a lot of hope.
This is the site of the Minnesota American Indian AIDS Task Force housing for people living with HIV/AIDS and their family. I'm Renee White Rabbit, also